Hi, we're going to take a look at grading from the FRQ from 2011 AP Stats exam, problem number 4. And it's all about an experiment that was done. And you can read about this. I'm surprised that it didn't have an A part talking about the experimental design aspect. But in this particular problem, when you go to the question, it says, do the data provide convincing evidence? As soon as you see that, you know you're going to be doing a test. And since I see two separate groups, and they are independent of each other, and we have actual data, I know it's going to be a 2-sample t-test. So in this particular problem, the first part of the points, and we're going to be grading this in sections, is going to be based on the hypothesis. Now, there are a lot of different ways you can do this particular problem in terms of the HO. But the HO is always going to be mu of group number 1 minus mu of group number 2 is equal to 0. So that right there would be the first check for this particular problem. Now, I'm using D for drug and P for placebo, okay? So that means I'm using B minus A. And it's not wrong if you do it the other way. So that means if I'm looking for a bigger reduction, that means I'm looking for the reductions with the drug to be bigger. Mu sub D, the drug, minus mu sub placebo is going to have bigger reductions, and that's going to be greater than 0. Check. Now, I would guess that many of you probably did it in problem order and did mu sub A minus mu sub B is equal to 0, and that was what the HO was. And the HA, mu sub A minus mu sub B, compare it to 0, but if you're looking for the B, which is the cholesterol drug, to be the bigger reduction, in this case it would be less than 0. So there are two ways you can get this right. You have to make sure you're consistent in your thoughts. So when you do your conditions, like when we go down and do the conditions the way that I've taught you how to do them, figure out what your group number 1 is, figure out what your group number 2 is, do your conditions underneath. Be careful which one you're going to use, choose your right subscript, okay, and go from there. So there's 2 checks so far. The next thing we're looking for is in your writing. I want to make sure you've identified what this is. So what I'm looking for are 2 more checks. I need to see the true population mean difference, okay, in the reduction, okay. So the population mean, oh, that's pretty good. Let's see, do I see the word difference? I don't, so I'm not going to give credit for that. But the context is right here, so I am going to give a check for that right there. So in my grading scheme, this one is worth 3 out of 4 points. So the checks I'm looking for is true population mean difference, okay, in reduction in cholesterol levels, okay, in group number 1 and group number 2, and that's getting the context in there. That's what I'm looking for. So there's 4 checks right here. Now the next thing is going to be the conditions. There are a lot of different conditions that we have to check. Now I've taught you a very, very structured way of doing the conditions. It makes it easy for the AP reader to grade it. You can see that this person right here is all over the place a little bit. They did the combo method right here, okay? So looking at this particular problem, I'm looking for my grading is that in group number 1, the people are independent of each other, and in group B, the cholesterol drug, they are independent of each other too, and these are males. So I'm missing that in this particular problem. Okay, that's condition number 1 for A and B, or whatever order you're doing it. Okay. The second thing is randomization. You have to make sure you state that the problem says that they are randomly assigned in each one of the treatment groups. And this person does that. It says, yes, stated in prompt. I'm going to go ahead and give credit. Check, check, because it sort of intimates that both groups for A and B were randomly assigned. The next thing I'm looking for 10%. And the 10% condition right here, it is missing. Okay, so the 10% condition XX. All right, and now I'm looking for condition number 4, which is the condition for checking for normality, nearly normality. So in this case, all right, for these particular groups, all right, and let's figure out how many different men we have going on right here. It looks like we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 men in A and 10 men in B. So that means both of those are less than 30. Sad face. Okay. So this person was trying to get it across But looking over here, they did do the box plots, okay? They do say that both samples, it's plausible since the box plot shows no outliers or skewness, all right? I need to make sure I check for unimodality, okay? All right, now skewness, that means it doesn't show skewness, but you're looking for approximate symmetry. So I'm actually going to give this person 2 checks for doing the narrowly normal condition because they did it for each one of the groups. Now, I'm a little bit more careful about how I've taught this and making sure that it's very, very organized. This person is somewhat organized, but I know that you've done probably a better job right here. Now, there's one more check, and that is to make sure that Group A and Group B men, okay, are independent of each other, okay? All right, so they are making that assumption that the samples are independent of each other. So that's condition number 9 right here, and I am going to give a check for this particular condition. I need to make sure that I say, I assume that the men in Group A receiving the placebo is independent of the men in Group B, which are taking the cholesterol drug, okay? So there were 9 checks, and now I'm looking for a since statement right here that identifies the name of the test, all right, by name, by name, by name, okay? So I'm looking for something that says a 2-sample t-test, okay? And I'm looking for it anywhere that I can find it. I'm looking around, and I see that the since statement right here, I don't see an identification of the name of the test, so I'm not going to give credit for that. Now, there are actually 10 checks for the conditions here. 9 for the conditions, 1 for naming the test, all right? Now, my person ended up getting 5 of them wrong. So my person got 5 out of the 10, all right? Now, moving on to the mechanics. There are only 4 checks that I'm looking for on the, 3 checks that I'm looking for on the mechanics. And the first one is the T statistic. Remember, you're going to run this in your calculator. You're going to do a 2-sample t-test on your calculator, and you're going to type in the data right here into L1, this data right here into L2, and you're going to run the test. You're not going to jump into the pool, okay? Your T statistic should be 1.617, or it could be negative 1.617, depending if you did A minus B or B minus A. Okay, either one is fine, okay? The next thing I'm looking for is degrees of freedom. It is 17.3, check. And the last thing I'm looking for is the p-value, and it's 0.062, check. So for the mechanics, there are 3 checks right here. My person got 3 out of the 3. Okay? Now the last thing is going to be the conclusion, all right? The first thing I'm looking for is using a 2-sample t-test. It is missing there. That's sort of my backup plan if you forget to name the test in the sense. I always want to make sure you have your using. Now you need to state what your p-value is and compare it to alpha. And you need to state what your alpha level is, okay? Now, here they did it, okay? The p-value is 0.0620. We can see that they said it's greater than the alpha, okay? All right? At an alpha level of 0.01, all right, because that's what they told you to use in this particular problem. You weren't supposed to use 0.05. 0.0620 is greater, so I do see the linkage, the comparison of the p-value against alpha. Now the conclusion, all right, the p-value is bigger. Okay, if the p is low, we reject the HO. In this case, we have to fail to reject the HO, all right? So I see do not reject the HO. Oh, I'm going to go ahead and give credit, but that's not the wording that the AP would most like to see. You either reject or fail to reject the HO. And that means there is no evidence, all right? This person says there is insufficient evidence, all right? And I'm looking for context right here to conclude that the cholesterol drug is effective in producing a reduction. You notice that they copied it directly from the words of the problem. And so they do have that right, that 4th sentence done correctly. So the 4 sentences are, okay, the using is a check, okay, linking up your p-value to your alpha and saying that it's greater, mathematical comparison, 2nd check. Number 3, fail to reject. And then the last one is, I do not have evidence. I would love to see it twice, one based on the HA, but we're only going to give 1 check if they have it correctly done based on the words of the problem. So my person has 3 out of the 4. And so overall, 4 plus 10 is 14. 14 and 3 is 17. 17 and 4 is 21. There are 21 total checks here. My person is 6, 7. All right. My person got 14 out of 21. Okay. I'm going to put a box around it, and that ends the grading of this particular question. Bye.